Welcome, everyone, to the Project Grants for Organizations application walkthrough. This is for the April 2024 deadline. My name is Todd Trebor. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am the Deputy Director at the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. So here's our agenda for today. First off, we're going to talk about if you remember one thing from today, what that should be. And then I'm going to introduce the program and discuss project definitions and examples as a part of that. I'll go over eligibility. I'll go over applying with a fiscal sponsor to this program. I'll go over the funding rules and restrictions, starting your application, the evaluation criteria and some relevant definitions. And then we're going to I'll log into the grant system and we will do an application walkthrough at that point in time. And then I'll talk about ways that you can access more help. So first off, if you remember one thing from today, this is something from a instructor of mine, from a grant writing instructor I had 10 or 12 years ago, two instructors actually, Mario Gardule and Randy Vega. As you all are aware, and we go over this in greater depth in our grant information session, there are three panelist archetypes, right? We have different groups of panelists every time reviewing applications. We recruit people from the Rhode Island public, people with an arts and culture interests, with an eye towards diversity along a number of metrics, identity, diversity certainly, and then geography from which they hail, live, and work. So I always tell applicants that because you don't know exactly who is reading your application, just that they're arts and culture enthusiasts, think of these three archetypes: a head person, a heart person, and a numbers person. And try to appeal to all three archetypes in how you write your application and how you present your information. So a head person is someone who thinks about the logistics of things, thinks about how they're structured and how they function. Is the timeline really accounting for all the steps? Are they considering all the factors involved in presenting their particular kind of program? And then also, are they connecting their program to, or what they're doing, to bigger picture field trends that are happening? Are they able to integrate any kind of information or data or research into how they're presenting the information that they are presenting? A heart person is someone who's compelled by personal stories. So anecdotes, certainly pictures, videos, and things of that nature. This is one of the reasons why I often advise people to get support materials that are in the voices or voice of those most affected by their programs, program participants, etc. I've had people submit us support materials, documents that have quotes from people who participated in their programs that are anonymized to whatever degree they need to anonymize them. But in as much as possible, integrating within an application things in the voice of those of people that are not the writer of the application makes it more alive and more interesting, and again appeals to that heart person. A numbers person is both someone who looks at a budget and knows how to read it and scrutinizes it and thinks about, to some degree, similar to a head person, how that affects the ability for someone to execute a project. But it's also using numbers to tell a story. How many events are you doing? How many people do you plan on attending? What are the dates? Saying in a project summary that you're going to do a performance in May is one thing. Saying that you're going to do, 3 performances on May 12th, 17th, and 19th with up to 300 participants in the audience and 10 actors involved gives it a kind of richness to and helps the numbers person imagine what's happening. So again, these are archetypes. They have just kind of a useful intellectual function because people are more than one of these things, right? We're all composite of these three ideas. All right, so that's the one thing to take with you if you don't remember anything else today, is in thinking about your hypothetical audience, think about these three archetypes. All right, introducing the Project Grants for Organization program proper. So the Project Grants for Organizations program supports arts and cultural projects that are relevant and meaningful to Rhode Island communities. It is our entry-level grant program, and Project Grants, or PGO, as you will hear me say repeatedly today, funds the broadest range of cultural activities. It is also one of our qualifying grant programs for general operating support for organizations, and it is the most common qualifying program for our general operating support program. The grant program awards grants of up to $3,000. Partial awards are very common. I'll talk about that more later. The one thing I will say too is that when panels recommend that an applicant receive a partial award, we always refer back to the project budget to ensure that the partial award being recommended is substantive enough for the project to occur in some way, shape, or form, which is why having a budget that is clear and accurate is important for these grant programs. In terms of who's eligible to apply, either 501c3, so federally recognized nonprofit organizations, or groups that are fiscally sponsored by a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Rhode Island. There are instances where out-of-state organizations can apply, for instance, an organization based in Massachusetts, but that's another conversation. You just have to have one-on-one with me about the details of what that means if you're an out-of-state organization. There are two deadlines in the year. The April 1st deadline for this year, the applications open February 1st. The deadline is 11:59 p.m., not a minute later on April 1st. The funding period supports projects occurring between July 1st and June 30th of 2025. So the entirety of the state's next upcoming fiscal year. The October 1st deadline, which will have the same application as the April 1st deadline, to answer a question that was in the chat. Those grant applications will open August 1st, and the deadline is October 1st, again at 11:59 p.m., not a minute later. And the funding period supports projects occurring between January 1st and June 30th of 2025. So project definition, this is something that's important for us to go over as we encounter these issues as we see them in applications. A project is defined as a discrete set of connected activities with a distinct beginning and end. Projects can be one-time events such as a festival, show, or exhibition, or a series such as a roster of classes or thematically connected concerts, productions, or arts programs. For example, a music organization could apply for a PGO to support a 3-performance series of free outdoor concerts at public parks. However, the same organization could not apply to support its entire 9-month season of programming, since that reflects the totality of the organization's programming and falls outside its definition of a project. It's also effectively, in that instance, feels like a general operating support application in one way. And then in another way, when things get beyond that project definition, they get a bit too diffuse and a bit difficult for a panel to process and analyze in terms of comparing apples to apples in the panel room and using the rubric that they have for evaluation appropriately. Some hypothetical examples of projects. One, a free day-long summer cultural festival at a public park featuring live performances, including Rhode Island-based performing artists. 2, a free series of arts classes led by a teaching artist at a social service nonprofit for 12 adults with developmental disabilities. Just to highlight a contrast between those two things, you can see, again, project grants for organizations funds a broad array of projects, including ones that affect thousands of people who attend, and others that maybe engage a smaller group of individuals. Example 3, a low-cost dance program for 8 young people within a specific cultural community, taught by artists or culture bearers from that specific cultural tradition, with the intention of preserving and perpetuating these cultural traditions among future generations. Again, a sample of the diversity of things that we fund in this program. Core to all funded programs is a connection and value to the community being engaged with by the public, fulfilling our charge to facilitate a meaningful cultural life for all Rhode Island residents. Per guidelines from the National Endowment for the Arts, for whom we grant out funding from, as well as from the Rhode Island General Assembly and Rhode Island taxpayers, our agency values around equity and access. Programs that engage underserved communities as defined by the NEA are particularly suitable for project grants for organizations. You might be asking yourself, what is considered an underserved community? Right here is the definition from the National Endowment for the Arts. Underserved communities are ones in which individuals lack access to arts programs due to geography, economic conditions, ethnic background, or disability. The definition may include BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or people of color communities, or ALANA, African, Latin American, Asian, Native American, Arab communities, people with disabilities, immigrant groups, rural populations, aging populations, people living in poverty, people experiencing houselessness, incarcerated populations, communities recovering from trauma or disaster, and military service members and veterans. I'm going to go into eligibility for this program a bit. Oops, wrong slide there. We'll move from that one. So eligibility, as mentioned, you either need to be a nonprofit organization or a group fiscally sponsored by a nonprofit organization. We define a nonprofit organization as one that is conducting business and is incorporated in the state of Rhode Island as a 501c3 nonprofit with tax-exempt status from the IRS. So you have to be both recognized by the state of Rhode Island and by the federal government as a 501c3 nonprofit to be a nonprofit organization. Governed by a revolving board of directors, trustees, or advisory board drawn from the community at large and shown to be actively involved in the governance of the organization. Or again, this is the fiscal sponsorship route here. You're being fiscally sponsored by an organization that fits the top 3 bullets there. Divisions, branches, departments, programs, or other subunits of nonprofit corporations, colleges, or universities aren't eligible to apply on their own. They must submit applications from the parent corporation. So for instance, if a gallery is based at a university like Providence College or the Rhode Island School of Design or URI, Providence College, or the Rhode Island School of Design are technically the applicant. Again, I mentioned you can still be eligible if your organization is incorporated in a state outside of Rhode Island, but you have to show your principal place of businesses in Rhode Island. You have to be registered with the Rhode Island Secretary of State's office. You have to produce programming predominantly in Rhode Island, and you have to be governed by a revolving board of directors, trustees, or advisory board drawn predominantly from the Rhode Island community. Ineligibility factors here, you're ineligible to apply if you are receiving general operating support for organizations funding from RISCA in the same fiscal year, or if you're applying for support for this project or aspects of this project through another RISCA grant program, or if you are delinquent on any final reports from previous RISCA grants. Applying with a fiscal sponsor, talk a little bit more about this again. As mentioned in that first slide, non-exempt Rhode Island-based organizations can apply with a fiscal sponsor that meets the definitions and criteria that were previously discussed. In terms of the mechanics of this, if you're interested in using a fiscal sponsor, you want to contact me because there's some things we have to kind of set up in the grant system to make that just easier for everyone. And it just should be known if you're thinking about this, that a nonprofit organizations acting as fiscal sponsors can also be applying for grants on their own for their own programs or be awardees. So if you're someone who is hunting for a fiscal sponsor and you want to approach an arts and culture organization that is in the general operating support program, they're able to both be in the general operating support program and be a fiscal sponsor for your organization's project grant. Excuse me 1 second. So when submitting a grant with a fiscal sponsor, you want to have a letter of agreement between yourselves as the applicant and the fiscal sponsor. We provide a template for that. Fiscal sponsors are responsible for ensuring that the final reports for grants are submitted, and they also are the entity that receives your grant check as well. Depending on the complexity of the fiscal sponsorship, it's very common for fiscal sponsors to charge an administrative fee. Some of them waive it, some of them it's between 10%, I've heard 12% as well, depending on the degree of administrative support and bookkeeping required for them. And this can be factored into your grant budget as an administrative cost. Again, requirements, you have to fit the nonprofit requirements outlined in the previous slide. They're technically responsible for signing any grant documents and ensuring that the sponsored organization, as I said, follows the rules of the grant program and submits their final report, they cannot be a project partner in the sponsored organization's application. If there's an organization that fits RISCA's definition of an eligible nonprofit that's involved in the project, they can function as a lead applicant and should. The kind of the big picture thing here is that it is a requirement of the federal government that with funds in this particular grant program, that they go to federally recognized nonprofits. However, we view fiscal sponsorship in a very technical way. This requirement is a technical issue that they can go to any nonprofit, any organization can be a fiscal sponsor because it's technically a pass-through. A church is a nonprofit, a library is a nonprofit. Any of these entities that might be in your community, they have relationships, can all function as a fiscal sponsor if you have a relationship with them. The character of the fiscal sponsor doesn't reflect the application of the applicant at all. Again, it's just a pass-through. All right, one moment, I'm going to pause the recording and see if you all have any questions for now. All right, now we're going to talk about funding rules and restrictions. So all grant awards are contingent upon the availability of funds from the Rhode Island General Assembly and the National Endowment for the Arts. When applying for the April deadline, one of the least fun things about it is the fact that you apply at April 1st. We can't technically make grant award announcements until 1 week after the state budget passes. And for those of you who've been in Rhode Island long enough and have been paying attention to such things, that's a moving target. In a good year, it passes at the end of June, and we make announcements the week after, a few days after July 4th, usually. There's been years where it doesn't pass until August or later, and that obviously mucks things up quite a bit. So if you're applying for a grant to support a program happening in July or August, whether you're participating in this particular Zoom room or hearing this recording, reach out to me and I'll talk to you about what the options are there in terms of understanding whether or not your program can move forward in a timely fashion. The maximum grant award in this category is $3,000, as I mentioned. And also, as I mentioned, partial awards are common. Only about 5 to 10% of applicants in this program receive full funding. Typically, the rest of the application receive a grant that's a percentage of the amount requested. Again, as I mentioned, panels will look at the budgets when figuring out their partial awards to ensure they're substantive enough for the project to happen. And I can also say that only in very rare instances do we give grants of under $1,000. And in those instances, it's typically for projects that are substantive in budget size versus ones that are modest in request or where the request is the only funding source for the project. Grant applications are considered on a competitive basis, and award amounts vary cycle to cycle with number of applications and panel decision making. So in the spring, I get anywhere between 55 and 70 applications. In the fall, I get anywhere between 40 and 55 applications, I'd say. Obviously, it's kind of hard to come up with averages given the last few years that we've been through. It is very common for people to apply for a project at the April 1st deadline and then apply at the October 1st deadline for the continuation of that project into the next funding period. So they might apply in April to support their project happening in the fall and apply in October to support the project happening more continually in the spring. We don't have any issue with funding projects repeatedly because it's different panels every time making funding decisions. But as it says there, the decisions are going to vary. So I have had instances where people find a project that really kind of works in front of a panel and it's something that works for their community. So they continue to apply to support it, but they might not always get funded or they get funded at various amounts. Again, it's about the quality of the project and of course its relevance to the community being engaged. That's critical. If you receive a partial award, you won't be expected to accomplish the project as initially outlined. You can reach out to me to discuss project modifications at any time. It's understood that if you ask for $3,000, you got $1,800. You're probably going to do half the amount of work that you were going to do as compared with when you got $3,000. You also have the option of declining a grant award with no penalties. And if you receive a grant, just to know, you must credit us on all your marketing materials. We have a acknowledging RISCA page on our website. It's critical for the general public to understand that RISCA exists as an agency and that we're supporting projects in their community using their taxpayer dollars. And those decisions are made by people from communities around Rhode Island. Allowable expenses. So grants can be used for expenses related to your project and or the production or presentation of it, including marketing and accessibility efforts with the project. So paying for daycare, paying for translators, paying for ASL interpretation are all fair game as line items. If you're using an RFP or an RFQ process to select artists for a project, the funds can be used to pay artists. These are considered stipends and must be publicly communicated as such. I put that in here because we technically cannot have funds from RISCA be used for prizes or awards. So you just need to frame it appropriately if this is something that relates to your project idea. Programs must occur in spaces that are ADA compliant. You're ineligible for a RISCA grant if a facility does not meet those ADA standards. And that's a hard what's the word? That's an immutable rule there. And all funded project activity must take place in Rhode Island. The list of what grant money can't be used for is longer and more illustrative. It can't be used for capital projects, construction or renovation of buildings, development efforts or fundraising expenses, addressing or eliminating or reducing debt, or contributing to an endowment, purchasing alcohol, food, or beverages, prizes and awards. That's why I have the RFP and RFQ thing on the prior slide, right? Regranting, activities that are associated with a graduate or undergraduate degree program, applications for projects that proselytize or promote religious activities, programming performances and exhibitions unavailable and or inaccessible to the public. Again, the ADA compliance space factor, but there's also other components you could see being there in some hypothetical reality. And then expenses incurred or activity happening outside of the award period. All right, starting your application, things to gather. There's a reason why I bring this up now, because people understandably get very focused and very stressed about the narrative responses in their application, that often they will leave these supplemental and support materials that are part of the application to the end. It should actually be the opposite, because we understand that grant writing is just a style thing. A lot of people have varied experiences with it. We really emphasize with our panelists to not focus on grant writing per se, but what are the core elements of the project? Are they communicating that they're thinking through all the things that have to happen related to the project? And then is this project relevant to a community? And again, the best way to do that is to have things in the voice of the community that's being engaged with by the project. So these first off things together are just the eligibility things that again will get waited until the last minute to do, and they should just be the first thing. You're going to want to have your 501c3 determination letter in hand. If you're using a fiscal sponsor, have their nonprofit determination letter. A SAM UEI, which is a 12-character unique entity identifier assigned by the Federal System for Awards Management that has to be submitted when any entity applies for federal funds. If you don't have a SAM UEI by the time you submit your application, reach out to me and I'll tell you what to do. You'll still be able to submit it, but ultimately, before the panel meets, we're going to need the SAM UEI number because we're just prohibited from making grants to entities in this program that don't have that identifier. You also want a recent 990 from one of your last 3 fiscal years. A 990 is a type of annual tax return that 501c3 nonprofits file. If you're less than a year old, again, reach out to me. I'll tell you what to do. But basically, you'll just submit a Word document that says we're less than a year old, therefore we don't have a 990 yet, and it's fine. This is a compliance thing, just to make sure that your nonprofit is up to date in its filings. And then lastly, a fiscal sponsor letter of agreement that I mentioned earlier. There's a template within both the grant application and within the grant guidelines page on the website. The non-eligibility things that again are kind of core to the application to focus on are your support materials that relate to communicating about your community, which we'll see in the application, and more ones that relate to communicating about the artists or culture bearers you're working with. So for the first category, you can submit up to 4 support materials showing how this project is meaningful to a community. This could be letters of support from community partners or community members inside or outside of the arts sector that are personally impacted by your organization's work. Could be a document of quotes, remember that, from past or current program participants, etc. Again, if you have video or images, you absolutely should include those. With video and images, it is great to, and audio, excuse me, as well. With video and audio, it's great to have those things uploaded to a third-party website like Vimeo or YouTube or SoundCloud and include the link in your application since panelists review this information at home. When it comes to images, you can certainly do something where you collage them into a PDF document or just upload single images, that's fine. Also, just as a guide, because I get this question sometimes, let's say you have 4 letters of support and you have 4 slots to support to upload support materials, put them all in one file. The general rule of thumb is if something to me, and this is just my experience with panelists, if something like letters of support, if there's like 6 or 7 pages of them, it's fine. A panel can digest that because letters of support are typically kind of stock in terms of how they're structured and what they say. What's important for a panel is seeing who they're from, and they absolutely read them, but they also know that typically they're functioning with a template. So that's something easy for a panel to digest as a letter of support. So if you have 6 pages of that and 1 slot, upload slot, that's okay. And then I mentioned 4 support materials that show how the artists or culture bearers involved in the project have experience relevant to the project. And this is where I talk about video, images, their resume, short bio with links to social media, Vimeo, YouTube, etc. Anything that shows their artistic expertise and content. Evaluation criteria and definitions, and then we're soon going to be looking at the application itself. So 60% of your score is community impact and engagement. So is there evidence that this arts and culture project meaningfully engages and inspires its community while expanding access and opportunities for Rhode Island residents? So these are the sub-criteria here. A complete and thorough understanding of the project's intended community, supported by demographic details and other data and information where possible. The project has a deep and direct relevance to the creative experience and/or cultural heritage of the identified community. The project engages residents in underserved communities as defined by the NEA. Clear and specific actions indicate the project will be accessible and inclusive and reduce barriers to access for those who want to attend or participate in the project. And lastly, community support materials come from a varied array of community sectors, both arts and non-arts, and reflect a robust support for the project. 40% of your score, the other 40%, is feasibility and likelihood of success. Is there evidence that the applicant has considered all factors necessary for the project to be a success? So the application clearly and thoroughly states specifically what will be done, when and where things will take place, and why the project should be supported by public funds. The budget is clear, detailed, and accurate, and the applicant has thoroughly explained how they arrived at the numbers they have, indicating where risk of funds will be spent. And budget expenses and revenues are clearly related to the project description and the goals of the project, and are a direct translation of the stated goals into numbers. The last 2 sub-criteria: what is proposed is achievable by the applicant on their own or in partnership with others. And if there is a lack of experience or an absence of experience, there's information provided that helps make a convincing case that this project will succeed. Again, letters of support here can be helpful, right? Applicant has a clear and thorough sense of what success looks like in the project. An applicant shares clear, thorough, and achievable steps they will take to ensure the project's success. Artistic vibrancy and intention is a score that comes into play in the panel discussion. I'll talk a little bit about that. Does the project allow Rhode Island residents to actively participate in arts and culture with project leaders who have relevant experience to the community being engaged? The 4 criteria there are: it provides an excellent intentional experience for the participants. The project leaders, artists, and/or cultural bearers can provide relevant and respectful engagement with the identified community. The project leaders have substantial experience working with or a part of the identified community they are engaging with. And lastly, the project directly supports creation of art by, for, and with, or of a specific community. So what happens in the panel room is at the end of a panel day, the panelists will have reviewed applications prior to a panel meeting. They'll have pre-scored them, and then they meet all day to discuss the applications. After they discuss each application, they have a chance to privately adjust the pre-scores that they made. And at the end of the day, I show them a spreadsheet. Typically, this has been on Zoom, where all the applications are arranged in descending order based on their combined community impact and engagement and feasibility of likelihood of success scores, with the top scoring applications at the top, bottom scoring applications at the bottom. Because this program is so competitive, and we just have a lack of funds in relationship to the amount of requests that we receive, the artistic vibrancy and intention score then becomes an organizer for applications that maybe score the same or score very close together. So if 3 applications got a 97, they would be listed in descending order based on their artistic vibrancy and intention score, right? The panel then makes funding recommendations, as I've mentioned, with the pot of money they have and based on the scores that they've done. The artistic vibrancy and attention score gives them some flexibility in terms of, first off, like I said, parsing out those applications that score the same, but also if they have an application that scored an 88, that they all collectively gave an average of a 10 for artistic vibrancy and intention, and they have application that scored at a 90 or an 89 that had a 5 for artistic vibrancy and intention, it allows them to maybe fund that project that scored slightly lower money and or more money or whatever. It gives them some flexibility in their decision-making processes, allows some kind of humanness into what can be a rather formulaic process. All right, everyone, we're going to walk through the application now, so bear with me while I transition. So what sometimes happens is people are like, how do I get to the grant portal? So the way you do that, you go to our grants page or just our website, and then go to our grants page by selecting grants, our grants. You select the grant program you want to apply for, in this case, project grants for organizations. And then you click on the link there, proceed to the online application. And that will take you to, hold on, everyone. Let's see. This page, which is our grants login portal. 1 second, that's logged in. And actually what you're seeing is what I see when I log in, which is not what you see. So I'm going to help you all see what you can see by logging in as the account I made for my dog, Amelia, who has a hypothetical theater company. So this is the page you will see when you log in. If you're a new applicant, if you've applied before, you will get to a dashboard that shows your recent applications. In either instance, you will always have the blue apply button up there. If you want to get to the grant opportunities, you just click on that. It'll take you to this page here. So first one up is, fortunately, project grants for organizations. So we'll click on apply. At the top of this page, we have an application overview. We've tried to label sections in such a way to be clear to applicants what is just stuff that we read for eligibility purposes, and then what is stuff that that is actually stuff read by the panel who's evaluating your project. You can see in the second box there's links to guidelines and template forms. I'm going to go over the rubric in a little bit and also just show you the project budget. I actually have a video, or we have a video. Jory Ketton, who's a wonderful artist and arts administrator, we hired to make a video explaining how to do project budgets. So that's why we don't include it in the context of these sessions. Eligibility quiz is where we ask all the questions of the things I went over. What's your status? Are you in an ADA compliant space? Are you going to use the money for things that, do you want to use the money for things you can't? Assuming you pass that muster, you then get into the information for the panel. You can see that we indicate that there. This is just introducing your project. So what is your name? Easy. What's your mission? What's your project name? And then what's your project summary? And here is the tiny soapbox I'm going to get on about project summaries. The thing to know about a project summary is it is deceptively important because it is the first thing a panel reads, and it is the thing that a panel refers to when trying to remember what your application is about. So you can see there, please describe your project in 2 to 3 sentences. This is also something, as it says, it's on public records for projects and what we use in press releases. You want to talk in the third person and you want to think about, remember that numbers person? This can be helpful here. So describing what it is you're doing more, focus on the what of what you're doing more than the why of what you're doing in the project summary. So for this, Amelia Knorr, my dog, who runs a theater company, a good project summary would be the Amelia Knorr Theater Company is going to be presenting a production of All Dogs Go to Heaven in August of 2024 at Roger Williams Park. There will be 3 performances with an expected attendance of 1,000 people, featuring dog actors from around Rhode Island, right? So really focus on the what in your project summary. I have people who I see focus on the why, and then when a panel goes back to the project summary, they can't remember what the project is, right? Again, just thinking tactically of what happens in a panel room. And then you're going to request the amount you want to request. You can see here information for risk of staff. These are just eligibility documents, but the things that you have gathered first, right after this call, actually, right? 501c3 determination letter, SAM-UEI, etc. Then we get into the information for the panel again. First off, the first question is you're going to summarize the project you're proposing. What's really important in doing a project grant for organizations application is to not just focus on the question, focus on the sub questions. So do all the things, just answer the sub questions, do the things it's asking you to do. Describe what you're doing, describe where and when the project is happening. Think about the numbers person, right? Name who is involved in the project. You're going to talk more about them in a future question. And then share what the intent or inspiration or why for the project is. I mentioned not putting that in the project summary. Here is the space to explain why, right? You're then, in the next question, going to describe your community and who comprises it and why this project is relevant and meaningful for them. If relevant, you're going to share how you will work with this community to carry out the project as well. If you have and are able to include relevant demographics and geography of your community in response, please do so here. Census information is great, etc. But really just speak in a way that feels accurate to how you're describing your community. And the census can be helpful in terms of talking and giving context of geography. We recruit panelists from around the state, but as you all are aware, even though we're in a small state, not everyone knows every community. I frequently have panels who I'm surprised at their lack of understanding of a place 30 minutes away from them, right? Community support materials, I mentioned these before. You're going to want 4 of those in the voice of people outside of your organization. Your people, who are those individuals involved in your project, and describe how the artists or culture bearers involved are and why they're best suited for the project. You can also describe other key partners there. If there's a lot of artists involved, just describe a few. If you don't have artists selected for the project, you can talk about ones you've worked with in the past or for similar programs, or the types of artists you intend to work with. I have sometimes people include as a your people support material what their call for art is or what their call for their RFQ or RFP language might be for a project working with artists. And again, here, the your people support materials is where you can upload those things or drop in links to your favorite third-party website with video and audio content. Defining your success, so describing what a successful project looks like to you and how you'll measure that. You'll notice that for most of these questions, we have an indicated response length that's desired. Follow that too. So we give you more character space, than probably needed, but we indicate how long the responses should be, ideally, take into account a panel's energy and metabolism, right? Didn't mention this earlier, but they're reviewing up to 25 applications. So you want to have that Goldilocks amount of information, which is why we give those guideposts in here. So for defining your success, consider things beyond numbers of attendees and post-event surveys, and keep in mind that we do not expect you to spend a large amount of time or funds on evaluation. Really think about what success looks like for you, and then figure out what things you would observe or measure that would indicate that. People get very in their heads about this. Success could be you have 100 people attend. You can say that. How would you measure that? Maybe you would count. You would just do observation. Maybe you only get 50. That's okay. You set a goal for yourself as a way to just understand and benchmark what success could look like. Maybe success is that you know, you get positive feedback. You need to be a little bit more specific about that. Maybe success is that, we hear from 5 people that they had a great time. How would you hear from them? How are you inviting that? Are you just approaching people in the audience at your program and talking with them? That's a completely valid form of evaluation, right? It's just simply having conversations with people who are in the process of attending your event, or maybe after. People in your community, talking to them that way. Again, you don't have to do surveys per se, and surveys aren't necessarily the most effective thing in most contexts, because it only matters the degree to which you can use that information. Again, think about what success looks like for you. How would you understand that you got there? And what are the ways that are feasible to you in order to understand that you've achieved those things? Providing access. So beyond your programming occurring in an ADA compliant space, 3 ways your project will be accessible and inclusive and reduce barriers to access for those who want to attend your project. I'm going to say this right now because it lights my hair on fire. It is occurring in an ADA compliant space. Do not mention that here. Beyond that, right? So access means a lot of different things and looks a lot of different ways. There is a link in this question. I recommend you open and look at it, that talks about not just things related to people with disabilities and providing access for them, ASL interpretation, etc., but also things like, what about people who have children? What about people who are low income? What about people who speak different languages? And the access tactics that you identify should be relevant to the community that you're engaging with. If they're not relevant, they're not relevant. If you're not doing a program for the Rhode Island community that is deaf or hard of hearing, having an ASL interpreter is probably not going to make a lot of sense unless you really know that you're going to have people from that community there. It can feel performative otherwise. But you might know that in your given community, there's a large proportion of people who have low income. So maybe you consider sliding scale fees for attendance, or a pay what you can option as one method to ensure that you're engaging those who are considered underserved within your given community, because that's going to look different in every place. Being underserved, being a member of an underserved community as defined by the NEA looks different in Pawtucket than it does in Bristol. And that's understood by a panel, and that's something that we orient them to as well. Your timeline. So you're going to show all the major steps involved in accomplishing your project, when they are happening, and who is doing them. Think back to the your people narrative question. This is where you're going to talk about what the your people are doing. And then lastly, a project budget using a template. I'm just going to show you that in a moment. Question 10 is really just a compliance question. So how are you going to use the risk of funds you're asking for? You just need to tell us in a couple sentences. And so we know you're like, okay, I'm going to pay artists, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Just a couple sentences there. And again, we just identify what funds can't be used for. And then question 11, if you have anyone in your community donating items, services, or space, you can talk about that here. Maybe you don't have anything, you leave it blank. This could, again, just be a couple of sentences depending. And that's it. It's not anything to sneeze at, certainly. It's shorter than it was before. And we're continually working on streamlining this program and all our grant applications. We're actually going to be working this year on creating one harmonized grant application for all of our project grant programs for organizations. This program, education, and then project grants, or sorry, arts and health grants as well. The rest of this is just who's your elected official, and then some drop-down menu questions that the NEA requires us to ask about what kind of institution you are, etc. I put at the top of this section, if you don't know, just answer them to your best of your ability, because I'm the one that checks them, and I'll modify your answers if I know you're off base with them in some way. All right. 1 second, everyone. All right, so I wanted to show you all the evaluation rubric. This is available within the grant application itself. These are all things I went over already. This is what a panel is oriented to use when evaluating your grant application. So you can see they're the guiding questions at the top, and they're going to score you with each criteria on a scale of 1 to 10, based on the degree to which they feel your project has evidence of community impact and engagement, for instance, across all sub-criteria, and how robust that is. So they provide us with 3 scores in the grant system, and those are your pre-scores. What we recommend is use this rubric because it's available to you. You're seeing how a panel is reviewing you. Use it yourself when looking at your own grant application, and then maybe have someone who is not involved in your project review your grant application with this rubric to see what they say as well. The thing to know about our grant applications, and I can say this as someone who wrote grant applications for years before I started working on this side of the house, is when you're new to it, if you are new to it, you might not be, it takes a little bit of time getting used to speaking in this way and in this style. But once you get it, things get easier. And I'll say too that with the first project grant for organizations an applicant does, it can take a while to get it together. But then over time, the nice thing is you can submit the same kind of application for the same project again if you do it again. So you can kind of evolve the application based on the feedback that you get from a panel, because anyone applying to a RISCA grant program gets panel feedback, and we focus that feedback to be on the strengths of an application, concerns in an application, and then suggestions for future applications and how to write them better, how to better communicate your project or better structure it so that it's relevant to your community. Second thing, whoopsie, hold on, because it does this to me, to do it this way when I project budget. Again, I'm going to send you all a video that goes over this, but it's pretty straightforward. You just identify the different income sources you have for a project, and they might be projected. And then the second part of this budget, you identify the expenses. And you can see we've broken the expense side of the budget now to be those things which are eligible RISCA expenses that you can use RISCA money for. And there's a section for the stuff that might be a part of your project that you can't use RISCA funds for. So you can just show them as a totality of what's being paid for. And again, to refer to a question that came up earlier, the budget, even if you're talking about a project that has activities occurring prior to July 1st, because it just starts before July 1st, the budget should just focus on those activities occurring after July 1st, okay? And there's a formula there that should tell you if the budget is balanced. What a budget balance means is that the total cash expense is going to equal the total cash income. When you write budgets for grants at RISCA and at many funders, the assumption that you're writing them for a future reality you don't know. So you're going to write it for a future reality in which you break even, right? You don't make any money, don't lose any money. When you actually do the project, things might look differently, and that's understood. But for the sake of projecting a future reality, you're going to assume that you break even. All right. And before I get to more questions, thank you, those of you who are watching the recording, and feel free to follow up with me if you have any additional questions.
Thank you.